The Polish opening starts with b4. Black continues with e5, even though this pawn will be immediately targeted by the bishop going to b2. There's two variations we're going to be looking at, bishop b2 immediately and also a3, which immediately protects the pawn in b4. As a matter of fact, Black's best move now, strangely enough, is to take the pawn in b4. So we take the pawn in b4 and give up the central pawn. The thing is, we're going to go on with development. In fact, Black only moved this bishop once to develop, and White has moved this bishop twice, and now he has put it in an uncomfortable situation because we're going to play knight f6, of course, since we don't want to lose the rook by because of bishop g7, and then the bishop will kind of be weird in e5 and it will have to go back. So White is wasting tempos, basically. That's the thing. So now it's White to play, and there's a lot of things that can happen. Knight f3, c4, e3, knight c3, even the bishop going back to b2. We're not really going to invest too much energy in seeing all the things that can happen because the game is completely open and it's not really that worth it. All we need to do is discuss the ideas behind how to beat this opening. It's already been mentioned how the white player played bishop to b2 and then had to go to e5 and it's in a weird position. So that's one of the things. After c4, for example, let's say knight to c6 attacking the bishop. The bishop has to go back. And now Black continues with the thematic d5. c4 was a good move by White because he put the fence over d5, which was going to happen inevitably. Anyway, Black is so much more ahead in development. And the funny thing is that the reason why the strong players don't really play b4 at a very high level in chess is that Black will be ahead in development. There's 3 pieces developed. White's got 1 piece developed. So after a move like e3 here, we can immediately exploit this is a mistake. d4. Idea we are to take the pawn, and f pawn would be really ugly to take like that. Pawn in d to take is not possible because of the bishop. So after knight f3, Black continues with a very smooth development, bishop to g4. So a move like a3 is met by bishop a5. What's another weakness we can talk about when somebody plays the Polish opening? a3 is the kind of move that does nothing, because after bishop a5, since the white player doesn't have the b pawn, you can't really kick the bishop away ever. So the bishop in a5 is just going to pin the pawn in d2 forever. After h3, well, we can give up the bishop pair even, because bishop takes, queen takes. In this case, we have removed the defender of d4, and our control over d4 is going to be long term. So after queen to d6, best move by Black now. White's got really nowhere to put his bishop except e2. Black castles long, white castles. Looks like a fairly normal game. Black now plays queen to e6. The idea is that after the swap of this pawn, there will be a lot of attack over d2. Black's position is super pleasant. After rook to e1 and knight to e5 attacking the queen, queen to g3, attacking the pawn in g7, but now Black continues with knight to e4. It's an excellent position to play. For example, right now the queen cannot really take in g7 because Black's attacking so many pieces around the opponent king. Queen's attacking h3. If the pawn is poisoned because of rook d to g8, queen goes to h2, then simply now it's finally time to take in e3. Pawn cannot take back because the bishop will be taking the rook. So after pawn takes, and knight to d3, attacking the rook and the armless bishop. So after bishop takes, rook takes, and bishop goes to c3 trying to protect the pawn. That doesn't really work because you can just take it. Besides, the queen's attacking c4, so it's an incredible position to play. Let's have a look at another scenario. So after bishop b2, we take the pawn and white takes back. The difference is we have won a tempo. Knight continues to f6. What happens after e3? Looks like a normal move, developing the bishop soon. Black continues with the thematic d5. Taking the knight in f6 will be really bad because that will come with the tempo, and Black will have too much attack over c3. It's completely stupid by white to develop a piece and move it like 3 times and then not develop anything else. So that's not going to happen. After, let's have a look at this idea. c3, trying to take full control over the center with the pawn, with pawns. Bishop to d6. And again, black is ahead in development, which is a funny thing to happen if you're black. So after bishop to g3, best move by black, by white. If white were to take, then we will still have two pieces developed. So after bishop to g3, idea maybe to get taken so the rook will be on an open file. Black continues with c5, already begin the struggle over d4. After bishop to b5 check, how do we meet this idea? Well, knight to c6. The idea of being taken with the pawn doubling up is fine, because this will be a double c pawn, and there's lots of scenarios that have been seen in this channel where the pawn will take in d4 and then the pawn in c6 will go up to c5 and challenge the other d4. The cost of an isolated pawn, but white loses completely control of the center. Anyway, after knight f3, castle, and the idea is to go for the center. So after white's best move, which is bishop takes knight, take back, and white plays d4. Black continues with bishop to a6. So d4 was not the right move. Bishop to a6 is stopping the white player from castling. It's a disaster. So instead of d4, what if white simply castles right away? Now bishop to f5. And after d4, now black continues with a surprising c4. This is giving birth to a pattern that every player has to know. The idea is that if white plays knight to d2 right now, which looks like a normal move, but anyway, black will go on with bishop a3, and this is stopping the rook from going to c1. The rook cannot go to b1 because of this bishop, and the bishop will be making a fork, literally. And the queen, there's no way that it can protect that move, that plan from happening. So after rook to e1, for example, in this position, black continues with knight to e4, and finally black will be able to force a favorable swap of the dark square bishop. If white tries to keep the situation alive with knight to e5, black will play queen to c7, guarding the pawn in c6. And if white plays knight to d2, challenging this very strong knight in e4, then black wins the pawn in c3. After queen to c1, only move to save the queen and attack the knight. Well, queen f3 was also possible, but black is simply up a pawn. If queen f3, then bishop to g6. Being taken is not a problem because we're going to open the attack on the queen. We're going to crash the pawn structure in front of the king when we have the favorable, in front of the opponent king when we have the favorable swap of the dark square bishop. So after queen to c1, the knight can go back to e4, and then the knight finally takes our super strong knight in e4. We can take back with the bishop, and black has a passed pawn. So we're going to stop the line here. Look at another position. After bishop b2 and bishop takes b4, bishop e5, knight f6. Often these Polish opening players will play bishop straight back to b2. Black continues with the thematic d5, and black has two pieces developed and a pawn in the center. White has only got one piece developed, so that says a lot about how much you should be afraid of this opening. After a3, attacking the bishop, bishop to a5, the bishop is there to stay, so you don't need to go backwards with the bishop, but rather just backwards on the queen side and keep pinning the d pawn. After knight f3 and c5, e3 to develop the bishop and castle, white has achieved absolutely nothing. Bishop e2, in this case bishop e5 will be pointless because it doesn't go to check or pin anything. Knight to c6 happens anyway, and after castling, black finishes development with rook e8. Only this bishop is left to be developed, so development is not actually over. Well, d4 by white, and it looks like these players, the white and black player, will be able to have like some sort of normal game. Like it looks like a completely normal situation, except black is just better, which is not supposed to. Like there's no reason for white to give black such a game. Black continues now with c4 and has prepared for himself this lovely outpost in e4, typical against so many d4, d5 type of games. What happens after knight to c3? Challenging that. And especially because the black knight doesn't happen to be in d7, where it will be able to go to f6, supporting the knight in f4 and create that kind of structure. Black continues with queen to c7. The idea here is to play a6, b5. And after knight to b5, attacking the queen, that's not a problem because of queen to b6. skewering. If white plays something different, like rook to e1 for instance, then black can play immediately b5. Idea of going and smashing everything on the queen side and bring up pieces forward. This is a typical setup that happens against the London system, the b5 attack, and this structure with d5 c4 that kind of paralyze the Lightfoot bishop. The knight cannot take in b5 for the reason we said before, so queen b6 here, and the threat of a6. Right, one more line in this useless opening. After b4, e5, bishop b2, take the pawn immediately. We're taking a side pawn and giving away a central pawn, but at least we are developing, whereas white is developing the same piece again. So after knight f6, what happens if knight to c3 is the next move? Well, in this case, d5 doesn't really work because the queen is protecting the rook in a1. So after bishop takes knight or a plan like that, queen takes back, we wouldn't really be targeting the rook in a1 because it's protecting, and the knight in d5 will be attacking both pieces, and that wouldn't be ideal. So black continues with c6 to support the pawn. After a3, in this situation, we have to go back to e7. So we don't really go to a5 because we're not really pinning the pawn in d, which means that the white player anytime will be able to play the d pawn, and our bishop there wouldn't be as good as it would be from e7, where he's got the possibility to choose between two different diagonals later on. After knight f3 and d5, this is how black will continue on this specific variation of the Polish opening. e3 and castle, bishop e2, and now c5. So we did c6 and then d5 so that we can support the pawn, but now that we have finished our development and we don't have to worry about the pawn in d5 hanging because we brought the bishop back to e7, now we can push c5. After castling, knight to c6, and you start to see how this type of moves will always be played against almost any setup of this opening. We're attacking the bishop now, so after bishop to g3, d4, winning space. Knight to b5 now, let's look at this move, is met by a6. Knight to c7, attacking the rook, is met by rook to a7. And after the pawn will be able to push, then black will be winning material. If white tries a counterattack like pawn takes d4 now, black first plays knight to h5, attacking the bishop, whilst there's also an attack on the knight, so black is winning material. So in this situation, instead of knight b5, what happens if pawn immediately takes? Then we take back the pawn. As we said, we're gaining space in here. We're attacking the knight. Again, if the knight goes to b5, a6, and we have the same pattern as before. And if the knight goes back to b1, black continues bishop to e6, development is complete. How to continue now? There's plenty of moves that can happen. The one that seems to be making more sense is bishop to b5. So the knight needs to avoid this swap. Knight to a5. After rook to e1, black attacks the bishop from a6, bishop a4. And now, best move by black is bishop to g4. We're trying to safeguard the life on the pawn in d4 as much as we can. What happens after a move like d3, which we didn't choose before because otherwise the bishop would have been stuck in e2 forever? d3 seems like a completely acceptable move now, especially considering something like knight d2, with the knight having some sort of escapes. Black plays knight to d5. So both players have the bishop pair. After h3, in this case, we don't take the knight in f3 because we have no compensation for that. We can play bishop to h5, and we're still pinning the knight. White cannot continue attacking because the pawn in g2 is blocked, so this bishop is here to stay. And black is also threatening this super strong fork in c3 in case the white knight in b1 were to move. At the same time, if the white knight in b1 doesn't move, then this rook doesn't have any future. So it's a bit of a stuck situation. The best move by white now is bishop to b3, which we obviously take with our side knight. And after pawn takes back, black continues with knight to c3 anyway. White queen cannot just get safe by playing to d2, because after black's best move, which is to take the knight, the situation looks terrible. After taking the knight and pawn taking back, and even if white has two attackers over c3, black has the threat of bishop f6 afterwards. Very strong move. For the same reason, queen c2 is not possible because it doesn't change anything. So what happens if after knight to c3, white takes it immediately? We take back. This pawn cannot unpin the white knight in f3, and we're always threatening to take it. Besides, we're also threatening to protect the pawn in c8 very well. We go bishop f6, rook c8, we got plenty of moves. White's best move is b4 because, well, white wishes to attack the pawn in c3 with rook, but then we're threatening a3. So after b4, best move is bishop to g5, stopping the rook from going to c1. And after bishop to h2, an idea of maybe being able to play g4 in order to release the white player from so much pressure. Black goes on with rook to c8, and after g4, black can immediately play c2. So after queen to e2, because all of these squares are controlled by black pieces, queen to e2, black can even sacrifice the bishop in g4, pawn takes back, and now black can promote. Let's have a look at this other variation. What happens if white plays a3 straight away, so in order to prevent bishop from taking in b4. Black continues with the thematic d5, so white opened with two side pawns, black with two central pawns. Bishop to b2 now. Black continues with knight to d7, protecting the pawn in e5, also because knight to c6 will be attacked by the pawn, and so we will lose material. So knight to d7, e3 is met by c6. So black has a good center here. Knight to f3, bishop to d6, so very smooth and easy to remember. D4 is met by, of course now d4 is, white is putting too much pressure over e5, and the best move to continue is e4. So the knight has to move after knight to e5. Black's best move is queen to g5. We have a lot of attack over e5. h4, attacking the queen, is met by queen to f6, so very quiet move, and black is winning material. f4 instead seems interesting. We have to take en passant, which will allow white to take back with the knight and come with an attack on the queen, but that's just stupid because of queen e3 check. Bishop blocking the end. Black continues very quietly with knight to f6, and after bishop to c1 attacking the queen, so that white will be able to castle and develop things properly. Queen to e7. There is no compensation for white even after castling. Black continues with the thematic knight e4, and she's got a much better game for black. So in this situation, after queen to g5, what happens after knight takes in d7? Bishop takes back. And the situation is too bad for white, because white's got a dark square bishop which is blocked, and a move like c4 can't really happen because that's not the right way to develop the light square bishop, especially since the black queen is putting pressure on g2, and it's not going to stop doing it. White can't castle queenside, and castling short side doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. Look at the two threatening bishop of the black player. So still in this position, after e5 and then a3, black plays d5, bishop, then in this case we have to play knight to d7, the only way to protect it carefully. If white goes knight to f3 immediately, unlike before, black can push e4. So that's kind of thematic to remember in these situations. After knight to d4, knight g to f6. That's what the Polish opening is about. Give black so much space in the center for no reason whatsoever. Let's have a look at this idea of development, like g3 for fianchetto. Black continues with h5 immediately, since we know that the only safe side, the castle for white, will be the short side. Then let's just start throwing pawns. Bishop to g2 is met by h4. Those are the best moves. And castling looks like white has been able to develop properly to do everything, but after pawn takes and pawn takes back, black plays knight to e5, And white can't really move anything. H3, for example, it's attacked twice. A move like knight c3 will be met by knight e to g4. A knight that was it's always going to be able to come back to e5 in case it gets attacked, and white is always going to be under threat of his king side weakening. A move like d3 here is met by the exact same motive, knight e to g4, and as long as black always has a pawn defending e4, you can take back with the pawn, then black's got nothing to worry. So d3 knight moves here, taking in d5. This is backed up by two defenders, and white will have this ugly pawn structure, so that's not going anywhere. A move like e3, for example, is met by knight to c4, attacking the bishop, and after the bishop moves, the knight can now go to g4, and this is a pattern to remember. This knight here is threatening. There's double attack on h2, and if it gets attacked, you can go back to e5. It's beautiful when this happens. When your opponent is giving you so much center, you can put these two pawns like this that they protect each other, and the two knights that defend each other, and you can always jump and then go back. And it looks like you're not doing anything, but the truth is you're threatening something, and then when you get attacked, because you can think, okay, h3 is just going to send the knight back. Yeah, but you have created now the weakness of h3 and the weak square of g3 as well. And now we have two pieces attacking h3 as well. We're going to take, so for example, I don't know, developing move, queen e2. Well, then let's just take here. So if white plays this move, king to h2, then bishop goes to g4, attacking the queen. After queen e1, queen d7, completing the attack over h3. h4 doesn't work because of g5.